Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. This place has a really, at night the sky is really big and it has a very, yes. Yeah.
I think we might get started shortly. Whenever you want. Check. Whenever you want. Okay. Who's driving? I will give an introduction.
Come on up.
Move closer.
Hi everyone. You sure
Hey,
you're
Donna.
most of you know who I am.
Well,
But for those of you that don't, my name is Donna Conwell and I'm the Associate Curator here at Montalvo. Thank you very much for joining us here today for Choreographing the Space, the second in our series of public conversations entitled the Chit-Chat Club that we've organised to coincide with the exhibition we're holding at the Project Space Gallery, Oh Great Reverie, Montalvo 1912 to 2012. And both these series of conversations as well as the exhibition have been organised to coincide with our centennial year. In 1912, Senator James Phelan constructed the estate in which we find ourselves today. And upon his death in 1930, he left the property to the people of California to be used for the cultivation of the arts. So with this series of conversations is a little bit inspired by that, and also sort of thinking a little bit about the future for Montalvo and discussing certain kind of key themes that relate to how we want to move forward in the future.
Wait, it was 1912 to 1930? You didn't live very long.
Well, that was when he lived here. Yeah. He lived to a quite good old age.
Sorry. He did it when he was a kid.
Yeah. He was very precocious. I'd also like to welcome our online viewers again. We're live streaming this event. So we're excited about that.
and the rest of you.
And now I would just like to introduce you to our two speakers. First of all, we have Pamela Z. Pamela Z is a San Francisco-based composer, performer, and media artist who works primarily with voice, live electronic processing, and sampling technology. In addition to her solo work, she has composed and recorded scores for dance, theatre, film, and new music chamber ensembles. Her large-scale multimedia work have been presented at venues including the Theatre Artaud, ODC, The Kitchen, Whitney Museum, the Cranach Art Museum. She is also the recipient of numerous awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, Creative Capital Fund grant, the Kellogg Albert Award in the Arts, as well as an ASCAT Music Award. Her multimedia opera, Wundercabinet, based on the Museum of Jurassic Technology and created in collaboration with Matthew Rubeck and Christina McPhee, has been presented at the Lab Gallery in San Francisco, Red Cat in Los Angeles, and the Open Ears Festival in Toronto. Pamela Z is also a former Lucas Artist Program Fellow, so we're really delighted to have you back. Barbara Goldstein is the Public Art Director of the City of San Jose of Cultural Affairs, as well as the editor of Public Art by the Book, a primer recently published by American for the Arts and University of Washington Press. Prior to her work in San Jose, Goldstein was a public art director for the City of Seattle. She's also worked as a cultural planner, architectural and art critic, editor and publisher. And from 1989.
So Phelan was
She was 1993. She was director of design review and cultural planning for the Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs. And from 1980 to 85, she edited and published Arts and Architecture magazine. She has written for Art and Architecture magazines both nationally and internationally, and she's lectured on public art throughout the United States and in Canada, Japan, China, and Taipei. I also would like, I'm sure this is something that Barbara is going to talk about more during the course of this conversation, but she's also been acting as a consultant and advisor on our Developing Sculpture on the Grounds program. And I think that will be part of the subject for discussion tonight. So thanks for me welcoming our wonderful guest speakers today.
Well,
It's not quantity, it's quality.
yes, and I'm going to start by talking a little bit, if we can figure out how to project this. Is our AV person?
Kelly says hello, she doesn't know how else to respond.
Oh, that's cute. Is the projector?
Maybe I have to say, what was our word before? It was slideshow.
Slideshow. View slideshow. It said view slideshow. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Oh,
So I'm going to talk a little bit initially about the Art on the Grounds program, because Montalvo is looking at the whole issue of creating an ongoing art program on the grounds that will allow people that are coming to visit Montalvo to experience not just the mansion and its formal grounds, but all of the grounds in a different way whenever they come here. So I've been working with a group of people from the board, which has been really fun, to develop a project, an approach to how you would choreograph the grounds, basically. So just up here is an image of the mansion, and the statement about what it was that Phelan thought about the grounds and what it is that people think about the grounds now. And it's really thinking about how the work and the programs are a way for people to really come in contact with nature and also experience art. So just thinking about how you can think about art on the grounds. When you think about integrating art into a public place, you could even think about dropping art into the place as if it were a gallery where it had rooms and you're putting artworks that people are going to encounter but that weren't really created for the place. Or you can think about the idea of art being something that responds to the place. So I tend to think that when you're putting art in a unique place, you should actually commission it so that it's a response to the place. So think about the idea that art can actually transform your experience of moving from one place to the other.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
Why do you feel that way? I mean, why do you feel?
I think that people that create work in galleries are creating a kind of intellectual problem for themselves, but they aren't really necessarily responding to the world around them. People's experience when they come to a special place is that they are going there to be in that place, and that the art should somehow enhance their experience of it or allow them to think about the context itself. It's not merely an intellectual exercise that happens in the studio that you transport to that place, but the work should somehow be a response to it. So, these are examples of artists' work that is a physical response to a contour, like Patrick Dougherty's piece here, which happens to be at the Lohmeyer Sculpture Park in St. Louis, or this other bridge piece, which is also in St. Louis. I don't remember which artist it was, the Best Functional Bridge. Art can also create a place. So this is a piece by Ursula von Breitingsgaard at, again, Lohmeyer Sculpture Park, where the work that she did actually creates an impression of place in the space that it was put. Art can be a way of framing nature, and there's a lot of nature here. So if you think about the fact that, there are interesting natural situations here with trees and trails and paths, artists can take the work that they do and either frame it, like you see in the left-hand slide, or make you think twice. The piece on the right is actually a human form that is integrated into a tree. Or if you look at a situation like this is Bob Irwin's work at the Stewart collection at UCSD, where he threaded this blue chain link fence through a eucalyptus forest, and because of the nature of the fencing, the location of the piece and the forest itself, when you walk through that, you experience the space in a different way, whatever the light conditions are. You also think about the possibility of turning space inside out. You could take a space like this, a room, a piece of architecture, and transform it by the way that an artist responds to it. This is a very simple warehouse space that was transformed into being a kind of cave because of the artist's use of light, reflective material, and mirrors. Or you can turn the outside in by thinking about things like what illuminates through the windows. I mean, if an artist were to look at this mansion and think about dealing with that in a way that you would experience it differently at night, if you were on the outside, you'd have a completely different effect than your experience of it as a pure piece of architecture. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about as we think about what might happen here. And one of the reasons that I was really excited about presenting with Pamela is because Pamela's been doing performative pieces that are a response to space and work with sound. And I think that sound, literature, and physical movement through space is another way that we can think about how we want to animate the spaces at Montalvo. So I'm going to turn it over to Pamela at this point. We figured out that we have to hit it.
Let's see. All right, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my own work. And my feeling about what work can and should do is that I am really open. I am equally engaged by work that is made wherever and transported to wherever, and work that is made where the space it's going to be shown in was taken into consideration when it was made. And I've done both kinds of work. I think I've done a lot of theatrical pieces that are live performance pieces with my voice and electronics and multiple channels of projected video, that I created them knowing that they would be going into a black box theater, and when you walk into that theater, it's really nothing, it's just a room. And then the lights go down, and all these projections come up, and I come out, and hopefully transform it into something that's completely different, and that was made not necessarily for that particular theater, but made for a flexible space where it could happen. And then I've had situations where I've been asked to make something for a place where I just couldn't resist because of the kind of place. And I'm of course responding a lot to what you said, so now, just make sure I have my place to leave my thing in. So I'm going to start by showing you something that I totally hadn't planned to show you because it just is an example of what we were talking about. Well, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just go here. Yeah, okay. Well, I have several things to show you, but I'm just trying to make my change. I'm changing my mind about the order, I guess. I made a piece, for example. I've been invited, I mean, I'm best known for doing performance work, voice and electronics, and in more recent years, voice and electronics with video. But in more recent years, I've also started doing a lot of installation work. And sometimes when I conceive of these installations, I conceive of them completely not thinking about a space in particular. But I was asked to do something a few years back. There's a guy in San Francisco named Not Human, who's he's kind of the electronic music and sound art maven of the Bay Area, or one of them. And he had a space called Recombinant Media Labs for a while. And I hadn't thought of this when we were talking before, but I just kind of have to show you a little bit. Maybe I should put it up while I'm talking. This space was a 36 foot by 24 foot room. And it was basically a white room, but it had seamless screens all the way around the room. So you had a 360 degree 10 widescreen videos that were each 12 feet wide, end to end, surrounding you. So you had 3 on this wall, 2 on this wall, 3 on this wall, 2 on this wall. And I've seen so many people do pieces in there where they just showed 10 copies of the same thing, or they maybe had 2 channels of video and they alternated them. And I thought, I don't want to go in a space like that. It's just too special. I don't want to go in a space like that without making something that I made for that space. And so this, what I came up with is a piece called Sonic Gestures. The place not only had the place not only had 10 channels of video, but it also had 16 channels of surround sound, and with subwoofers buried under the floor. So this speaker system can't really produce for you what this sounded like, because what I did was I took these hand claps and I slowed them down so much that it became subsonic. But the other thing I did is that there's 12 different channels, so no one of those screens is the same. And then at times, you'll see in a moment, I did things where I created larger images that would actually traverse the different screens.
So you really created an environment, you created a physical environment.
Yeah, for example, you'll see like this is going to end up being a 36-foot long arc. This is going across 3 12-foot screens. And it was all made from gestures, physical gestures that I did, that I captured on video, and the sounds I made to accompany those gestures. But sometimes they were in real time, like this is, and other times I dramatically slowed them down or sped them up. Because I just wanted to build something that actually, I didn't want to go into a room with 10 screens and show 10 copies of the same thing, you know.
Is that literally the space or is it a proposal?
This is what the piece looked like. I created this after the piece, but it's documentation of the piece, and I had to sort of construct it because it was impossible to shoot it in there. So I had to sort of construct it to look like what it looked like. But if you can imagine in the space, that would be one wall, and that would be 36 feet long.
Amazing. When you say subsonic, what does that mean?
It means that the pitch is so low that it starts to be below the level that we perceive it as a note. I mean, subsonic is an exaggeration. Subsonic would really mean you didn't hear it at all.
HTTP.
And then there was this one section that I couldn't resist. It's called the long URL.
Due to high call volume _ extremely long & dash caret dash stick equals. You might want to write this down, comma, all one word, plus sideways frowny face, colon, open parentheses. Unknown character, comma, triple forte, / @ symbol, caret, greater than, dash access, M dash, system / remote debugger connection.
Love it.
Beautiful.
So anyway, that's just a little example of what that piece looked like. The whole piece was 18 minutes long. It kind of was in 4 movements, and it was 18 minutes long, and each movement was, one movement was the hand claps, one movement was the long URL, one was these sort of, you know, reaching things, and so I sort of separated it into these 4 little sections, and if you stayed in there, it could loop around.
That's so cool. Can I ask you one other question? I'm sorry, I'm such a question asker, but I'm just curious.
We have such a small group here. I feel that we should be as informal as we
That's
possibly
okay,
can.
That's what the point in the Chit-Chat Club.
I'm just curious, because part of my experience of you as an artist is thinking about your corporal relationship to the sound you're creating.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, with the extraordinary hand movements in there, are they were you making the sound by
Yes.
doing that one?
I was, basically what I did to start the piece was I just went into a studio with really high-end AG cameras, and in front of, I was going to do blue screen, then I decided no, I would just have a glass background and be in foreground, and just really well lit. And I just did a bunch of gestures and vocal sounds, and I have this strong connection between my gesture and my physical gesture and sound. And I often do performances where I'm actually triggering the sound by making gestures using controllers that have sensors in them. But even when I'm not doing that, I often, I connect the sound to I connect the sound to a gesture. So I was just improvising a lot of gestures with sounds, and then I probably recorded like an hour of me doing that. And then I sat in my studio and just found little fragments that I liked. And so the sounds that you're hearing are the sounds I was making, including the clapping, which then I thought that was much more interesting if I slowed it down because you got this thunderous.
Yeah.
And in that space, it really sounded like thunder because I slowed it down so much that the hands are approaching each other very slowly. When they touch, you get this, explosion. So, and then I was very diligent about trying to build something that would specifically fit in that space. And so this is kind of illustrating some of the ideas you were talking about in terms of thinking but to me, it's really, I don't think that all work needs to be site-specific. Far from it. More of my work isn't than is. But sometimes instead of being site-specific, I'm doing, as you suggested, trying to create an imaginary space that could be superimposed someplace else. But I did another piece. I'm just jumping around, getting much more casual than my intention had been. But I'm going to go to the internet now to a friend of mine's Flickr account and show you. I have a friend who has this program in New York called Elastic City. I want you to jump to the top of the screen, please. Please go up to the top of the screen. Thank you. If you talk nicely, do. Okay. A friend of mine in New York has this organization he started called Elastic City, and what he does is he sponsors artist walks. And they started out as mainly sound walks, but all different kinds of walks, and they're kind of participatory walks, and people will buy a ticket to it, like a concert, but then they meet the artist somewhere, and the artist takes them on a walk. And so he asked me to make a walk, and so I made a walk called Sight Reading. And sight reading, it's, how many are musicians? Any musicians? So this is a pun, which you would understand better if you were a musician. In music, you have something called sight reading, but it's called S-I-G-H-T reading, meaning that the musicians were handed a piece of music without the chance to look it over and rehearse, and just try to play it by reading it on the spot. And so usually, if you're in an orchestra and you're about to play a new piece, you get handed the new music, the first time through, it's sight reading. You're just reading the notes and playing them, and you're having to try to have feeling while you play, but really what you're doing is going, oh, what's the finger? You're reading it. So I made a piece called Sight Reading, S-I-T-E reading, and what I did was I walked around in Soho and I found spaces in Soho that I thought would make an interesting graphic score. And then the walk was a series of these places. So I had the participants meet me at the corner of Broadway and Lafayette, or not Broadway and Lafayette, those things do not intersect. I mean, just below Houston and Lafayette in New York, and we met in this little triangle park, and I gave them the instructions, which were that I was going to lead them. I did about 4 of these walks with 12 people at a time. And so I had this group of about 12 people, and I would lead them from one spot to the next, and when they got to the spot, I would show them what the score was, explain to them how they were to try to interpret that, and then we would perform it, and then we'd move on to the next piece. So this is one example. There was a shop window that had a bunch of floodlights in their window that were programmed to turn on and off. So I told each person to pick one of these flood lamps, that's their light, and whenever their light came on, they were to sing a sustained note until the light went on. And so we did that until I, stopped them and moved them to the next place. So there were a lot of these spots. Let's go the other way, I think. There's a subway map. How many people know New York City? Have you ever been on, I think it's Mercer, no, it's Green, below Houston, below Prince maybe. There is embedded in a sidewalk a piece of public art that looks like the subway map. And so we were singing that, and I told each person to choose one of the lines. You could choose an uptown downtown line or a crosstown line, and you were to just use the curves of the line to change pitch and to use the stops as punctuated sounds. And so they're looking down at the sidewalk and preparing their part, and then, oh, oops, I'm going the wrong way. This is another section. This is the one I showed you, the first one with the lights. This is them, they're facing the lights. And the way we started was I touched their shoulder. I gave them a few moments to pick their light, and then I touched their shoulder and they'd start. And I touched everybody's shoulder. When everybody was in ensemble, I took them all out one at a time by touching their shoulders. There they are, singing this is a magazine stand on Lafayette and I would say Spring. There's a magazine shop, and so they were to do a text sound piece by reading all the text on the fronts of the magazines out to a rhythm. And this is back to the subway map on the ground. They're performing it. This is in the Prince Street station, and these are public art on the wall by a woman named Ellen Spike. No, Ellen Spike is another artist. This is somebody else Spike, who I found out is related to Ellen Spike. But anyway, here they are. We're walking briskly along the subway platform, and these figures on the wall, every time their shoulder passes one, for the duration it takes them to pass the figure, they actually intone the word Spike. People thought we were nuts. Here we've gotten on the train now, and I don't know if you noticed, but like in the 6 train, there's a flashing sign that tells you the next stop is Spring Street. And then it just keeps flashing that. And then it tells you what the destination is, end of the line. In a series, it tells you the end of the line, the direction you're going, and then which the next stop is. And so we just used it as a text score, and we just pronounced everything that was flashed on the screen. And so that was that piece. And
how did that sound in unison?
Yeah. It was beautiful. I loved it. And people on the train were like, one guy joined in. It was great.
It's like being
Yeah.
It's like being in a church, right?
Speaking of that, now doesn't it look like a little church choir or something? We're singing the cars here. I had them standing on Broadway, facing the street. I put them in 2 rows like a choir, and I had the front row sing the far lane and the back row sing the closer lane, and that their notes would correspond to, as cars passed, the length of the car, so it would give them the duration as it passed in front of their view, and the height of the car would give them what pitch they would use. And then I said and we did it for 3 traffic lights, so it was a 3-minute piece, and or however long that would have been. And in between, then the pedestrians would come by, and they were little pointy little sounds, and then when the cars would go, it'd be longer tones, but it was nice. It sounded lovely. There they are discovering their score. I think this was us singing the skyline at the end. But anyway, so it was not part of these. But anyway, so that was sight reading. So that was probably like the utmost like site-specific sound piece that I could think of to make. The people who took the walk, some of them were quite surprised by how much they had to actually perform in public, and some of them were a little shy, but they kind of got over it. They were kind of into it in the end. It took about 90 minutes. We did this little walk. We would stop. Each thing was a couple minutes long, 3 to 5 minutes long, and we'd go on to the next thing and made sort of full circle. We got on the subway train and rode back to the point we had been when we started, and so. But that's one piece, and I know that I'm.
You know why this piece makes so much sense to one sitter here? Because if you think, who is it that said everything is art? Okay, I'll take that one. Well, when you think about it, like everywhere you go, Pamela, maybe, you walk outside and everything becomes music. And the first time I realized that nobody was going to tell me that I can't be an artist was when I was walking, visiting my brother, my big brother, and everything in the streets of San Francisco turned into sound and turned into an installation. It was like the whole world was that. And so your piece, it makes me almost want to cry because it has that full, that real understanding of that sensitivity. You just have to be open to something.
Well, thank you. What a nice
Yeah.
response. She wasn't even there. She wants to cry. I'm just going to play one more example because I know that we're probably running a little bit long. But I have a piece that I made, my most recent, well, no, that's not true. I'm working on a piece called Memory Trace, which I worked on here. I should show you part of that because it actually is using the grounds, those video of the grounds. But I'm going to just show you a little bit of baggage allowance because this is a large-scale work that I made. Actually, this is really apropos because this piece exists in 3 different configurations. One was a gallery exhibition with like 7 media works that were objects with sound and video embedded in them. And then there was one that was a full evening performance work where I'm on the stage and singing and projected video and manipulating props and so on and so forth that happened in a theater and was designed for a theater, like a black box theater. And then the third configuration of it is a browser-based version that hopefully will indefinitely exist on the web. And I actually worked on that a lot while I was here too, that final part of it. And that exists, for those of you who want to check it out, the URL for that is baggageallowance.tv. And if you go there, you can play with the piece. It's there and it's interactive. And unfortunately, it's still not ready for non-flash enabled devices, so it's not going to work on your iPad, but you can do it on your laptop. Yeah?
What was that URL again?
Baggageallowance.tv. But I'm just going to show you a little bit of the installation of the performance part. This was actually, it premiered with this installation, which was at the Krannert Museum in Illinois. And I'm not going to show you the whole documentation, but as you walked in, the thing that I think is kind of interesting when talking about site, when you walk into the gallery, I had all these different separate pieces. They gave me a whole gallery. This piece was bag X-ray, that's the weeping steamer trunk suitcase. This one was called Holly's Patents. This was a single channel piece, and this was sonic suitcases and tape loops. So those were all the different pieces. But as you walked into the gallery, the first thing you encountered was this. And I asked them to instruct the guards to stand there and ask people to put their bag on the belt. And so people often would react as if it was, they thought, wow, the security at galleries has really been heightened. And I had designed some software in Isadora so that when the bag goes in, it grabs an image of their bag and sort of negatives it, makes it look like an X-ray, and then inserts like objects that they didn't think were in their bag into the bag. So they put their bag in, they see an image of their bag with like a weapon or something in it. These are some of the objects that would appear in the bag. You know, I had live animals, I had an Emmy, I had like, you know, various weapons and tools, you know, and those things would just be sort of superimposed on the image of their bag. And the thing that was really funny about it to me is that a lot of the older people would see it, and when their bag came out the other side, their instinct was to grab the bag and look inside. They thought the trick was that somehow I had inserted these objects in their bag. Younger people will be like, ooh, what software did you do this in? But, and then this piece here was a weeping steamer trunk, and this one I had designed it so that when you open the drawers, I had embedded a display in the lid of the trunk. When you open the drawers, there were actual physical objects inside the drawers, but also it would trigger a sound, some kind of a soundscape. You'd hear little stories, or you'd hear whispering, or you'd hear crying, or, you know, various things, and different images would appear also here when you opened the drawers. And there were all kinds of unusual objects in the drawers, some very mundane, just gloves and a locket with my parents' picture in the locket, some odder things like a tiny little model of a Victrola. I even had one drawer I think that was filled completely to the top with hair, which this guy was actually pretty brave. He actually reaches in and touches the hair. Most people were a little creeped out when they opened the drawer full of hair. But so that was just, you know, sort of in the gallery and there, and you know, I had to like put signs to tell people that they could touch that those are all family photographs. But I had to it was really hard to make people understand that it was okay for them to touch this object and that actually it wouldn't do anything unless they opened the drawers.
Do the drawers trigger different video?
Yeah, different video, depending on which drawer they opened, different video would be triggered, different sounds. And then I'm going to stop after this one for the installation because I know we're probably running out of time, but this was my favorite piece of all of the media pieces because technically it was much more simple than a lot of them, but it was something very affecting to people. This is a very small suitcase, maybe 20 inches wide, and it has a projection of me sleeping in it. So you see this adult woman asleep in this little suitcase that's kind of it's more like an infant could maybe really sleep in there. And I actually molded the inside of the suitcase so that it really has a three-dimensional look to it. And people would walk up to it, they'd be startled by it. And people were either found it charming or they actually found it kind of creepy. And sometimes alternately so. Because there was something that was sweet about this tiny little person sleeping in there, but at the same time the scale was really confusing. And it was a little disturbing too because if you lean close, there was a sound design to it where I'm whispering, just muttering really fast, all the things I'm worried about. And if they lean down really close, they'd hear this, and then every once in a while I actually turn and look up at them, and they would be so startled. A few people actually scream and jumped away. But anyway, there's more pieces. I'm not going to show you the rest of those because I just want to show you a moment of the live performance of Baggage Allowance, which is by contrast designed for a theater stage instead of a I did this at the kitchen in New York and at Theater Arto in San Francisco. And yeah, those are the two big theaters. And I've done it also probably other places. And this documentation, I think, is an amalgamation of both the kitchen and Arto.
Did you pack your own bag? Person. Did any unknown person ask you to carry something? Person. Unknown person. Unknown person. Have you at any time been out of your mere control? Person. What is the purpose of your travel? Person. What is the purpose? What is the purpose of your travel? Unknown, 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 unknown. 2 pants, 2 or 3 shirts, camisoles, maybe another jacket, a vest, You go along the way, clothing, one or two pair of jeans folded, pants on the pair of the unders.
One or two skirts, one pair of dress pants, one pair of jeans, maybe one sexy nightie, depending on what's going to happen. And some basic pairs of socks.
Just enough socks and underwear.
So you almost forgot the socks.
Anyway, I think I'll stop it there. But, so those are just some excerpts from baggage allowance. And what you saw here was some things from the installation work, and then the performance version of the work. And like I said, the third version is something you can go explore on your own, and which lives in an environment that is everywhere and nowhere. So that's just another example of site-specific work, I guess, is when I created the browser-based version, I actually created it for the browser. So I didn't want to just put documentation of the performance online, like as in a YouTube video or whatever, but I wanted to actually make something that felt like a piece of art that lives on the web. So that's what that version of it is. And you can go and sort of play with it yourself and experience it. And if you're crafty, you can even find your way into some places where you can actually change it. And some places where you could maybe leave some of your own baggage or baggage stories. So,
Looking at your work, it kind of makes me think about three different things that could be aspects of how artists can really choreograph people's physical experience of this place. One is that works can create their own environment. Like some of the pieces that you just showed were, as you said, they can go into a black box. They create an environment that people want to go to because it's creating an environment in and of itself. A second one is that you can develop work that is a direct response to that environment that actually builds on that environment. And the third one, which really kind of goes to your art is anything and a kind of like John Cage aspect of your work, is that you can use the environment to create a set of circumstances that people respond to so that the work itself becomes a continuous living thing. And I think all of those things are things that would be appropriate to see happen here because the environment is so rich and stimulating. And I could see a lot of opportunities for artists to work in that genre. You want to talk a little bit about the things that you were doing here and how they were responding to the environment here?
well, I actually, when I got here, I had just come off of, I was on kind of a residency jag while I was doing this. I had just had a Jurassic residency. And there I started work on a piece called Memory Trace. And as you probably could tell from some of this work, that part of my process when I go to make a work about something is I often just interview a lot of people about that, and I record these interviews. And then I end up using fragments of the things that those people say as part of the music or part of the sound for what it is I'm doing. And so while I was at Jurassic, I interviewed every artist that was there, plus all the staff people, everybody I could get my hands on about memory, and asked them all these questions about memory and forgetting. And then I made like this little text collage from that. And so when I got here, I had just finished that residency, and I wanted to do some further work on the piece. And so I thought, it's funny, we're talking about like making a piece for the property or for the space. I have a tendency not to do like sort of a nature environment isn't necessarily the kind of thing that I associate with the kinds of imagery or although the sounds I often use bird sounds and all kinds of human sounds everything is natural. Nature to me is a funny word anyway because it's all nature. But, you know, this kind of bucolic setting with trees and roads and, you know, places where you can't see any sign of human intervention or much signs of human intervention. Is not my typical sort of subject matter or space to work in, but I thought it would be interesting in working, thinking about memory to try to capture some images of the grounds because I had taken some, I'm not much of a hiker, but I had taken some walks on the property and thought that it was kind of interesting and I was having interesting memories about that and I thought when I leave here, I want to have that. So I took a camera out on the path and I set it up on a little tripod and there's a place somewhere where there's almost like a little bridge type thing. It's kind of like when you come out of the composer studios and then you start going up that hill a little ways, there's this little part where there's a wooden footbridge. So I put a camera in front of that and I did all these things where I was leaning in front of it and doing gestures in front of it because I love gestures, coming across the bridge. And then I took it back to the studio and started editing pieces of it together and playing with it and some of these memory things. And I found actually that I was really enjoying working this way. The other thing I found that was kind of beautiful was taking these images of greenery and putting a Gaussian blur on it so that it's like, it became like a sort of a foggy memory that you're like, where was that place? Something was green, I don't know, you know. And so I was playing with that. And so I've now got this whole, I've actually got an installation piece that's going to premiere in May at Art Gallery in their project space in San Francisco, and it's going to be Memory Trace. And I've also been doing fragments of Memory Trace as part of my performance. I did some today when I performed in Santa Clara. So that was, so the lion's share of what I worked on while I was here was that, and the finishing the browser-based version of Badgers and Robins. But I also started talking to Kelly and saying, and I don't know, we got talking, I don't even know how this came up, but I said it'd be really fun, or she maybe suggested it, I don't know, that I should curate a vocal festival or something. And so what I thought would really be great would be to make an entire day or weekend of it where there are some performances that happen in the normal performance venues that are here, but also all kinds of things that occur in other spaces. Like, I had this idea that it would be great to like spread all these performers really far and wide on the property from each other, and we'd all have synchronized watches and make sounds from really far away simultaneously, so that the viewer could be like kind of anywhere on the property they'd be getting a bit of this thing. Also to make things where like you take like, you know, there's that sort of strange deep area that's between when you walk up the road to go up to to come from the residences up to here. I thought it'd be interesting to place vocalists along there and have them doing some kind of, so I have all these ideas about placing performers. Not necessarily even just vocalists, but even like maybe bujo dancers. But you know, people who are like that are sort of like planted a little bit incongruously into the property as to make the whole property become this kind of living, breathing performance work. So that's one idea that has occurred, a couple of ideas that have occurred to me.
Right, I mean, to me, what's really interesting is that when people think about art on the grounds, the natural tendency is to think, I'm placing a thing here and people are going to go see it. But the nature of our experience of art is much more multisensory. So when you think about sound art, you don't really necessarily think about something where you go to a place and you hear that thing because sound is dimensional. So having an interesting site like Montalvo that's got, you know, both buildings and contours and paths and different vegetation kind of lends itself to having an experience that you could move through, like you described, where you can really sense the space through your ears and through seeing motion. And to me, that's one of the real kind of promises of developing an art program here, is to think about it as being something that appeals to your body and to all of your senses.
And I think also, my tendency, I think, especially if I'm given like, oh, this is a nature setting, blah, 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 my tendency is to, there's a side of me that just wants to subvert that somehow.
Unnatural sound.
You know, like put something that seems like it doesn't fit there, and then see how that changes it, you know? And I mean, I have all these thoughts about like planting speakers amongst the vegetation and so that they're kind of hidden. And then you get sounds that are maybe naturey, but then maybe some sounds that are like, why is that sound here? You know, so I think there's the possibilities are boundless.
So does anybody have any thoughts, anybody in this group have any thoughts about what they would like to see or hear here, or ideas or responses to what they see?
I would just like to say that I just love that idea. It was so wonderful to hear about your work on it.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think that this whole idea of, you know, these sort of very different sorts of strategies of having a sculpture in the ground that you come upon and you immediately recognize, oh, this is an art object, and this is supposed to be my relationship to this thing. And what you're proposing is something much more subtle that you would sort of come step into without really even realizing that you're participating in that. And I think that's such an interesting way to deal with how to integrate art into the ground, which is very lots of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. And I think I just
Right. And so it's even like when you look at Robert Irwin threading the chain link through the trees, you know, it's not like, oh, here's an object sitting here. It's like you perceive it as, wow, the light has really changed here, and what is that? You
Well,
know?
what was interesting to me is I haven't seen that piece, but from your photographs, the thing that really struck me immediately is that this is almost a sky color.
Right.
And these trees are sort of preventing the sky, and he's kind of put it back in a weird way. It's almost the opposite of, there's a guy named Benji Young who lives in Project Artaud, and he does these, if you're ever in San Francisco around Project Artaud, he's done these crazy things, like there's a little place called Coffee Bar that's on the corner there, and if you're there, just look outside the Coffee Bar, and what he's taken a telephone pole and dressed it back up as a tree. Like he's taken tree bark and attached it to the outside of a telephone pole so that it now is sort of lumpy and tree-ish instead of this perfect cylinder. And then he's also done just half a block away from that, a stop sign where he took like the palm tree stuff and wrapped that around the pole of the stop sign so that it's like it's a palm tree stalk, but instead of then the tree at the top, it's a stop sign. And so he's kind of done almost the reverse. He's gone in this urban setting
And put nature
and
back in.
put nature back in this really kind of odd way. And it's so funny to me that people even post on that telephone pole. People still come with a staple gun and post their posters on top of this knobby tree thing that shouldn't be there. It's like
Well, it's like it's trying to remember where it came from,
Exactly.
right?
yeah, it's great.
Good. Any other thoughts or comments or yes?
I like your idea about the sounds coming from the hidden speakers. But it would be nice if there was a way to somehow make it interactive, kind of like how your walks were, where people can participate.
Yeah, and these days that's not so hard to do. I mean, there's a lot of different. It's interesting because then, you know, the way that you need to integrate, that's always the interesting problem, especially when you're working with technology, is how to integrate the technology in sort of a robust enough way that it can survive whatever elements it has to survive. But, you know, you could certainly build in some protected like little cameras that would be hidden up in the trees so that when you're standing under it, it senses your presence and changes accordingly. You could certainly build in, there's all kinds of things you can do in software, different kinds of sensors that could either be listening to the sound of the footfalls of a person approaching and responding to that in some way. You saw like in this video of baggage allowance, I don't know, it was a little subtle, so I don't know if you noticed, that towards the end of the performance excerpt that I showed you, I was dragging the train of suitcases across the stage and I was singing these little short sounds, and I don't know if you noticed or not, but the video that was projected behind me was responding to that. And what I had was, I had shot out the window of the train car coming down from Bard College to New York. I had shot out the window, and then I had taken this video of the trees passing by my train window. And that was what was being projected, but it was with a Gaussian blur on it, so that it was just this mottled looking, indistinct, abstract, soft pattern. And every time I would sing, it would bring it into focus, so that just for that moment, you could see that it was trees. I think in the video documentation it was hard to see that, but, or, you know, the roadside going by the train window, essentially. But that was a really easy thing to do in software, to just like have it listen to the amplitude of my voice, and it sends a signal to do something. So there's a lot of things that you can do that are either really straightforward and simple with sensors that pick up a sound and that triggers something, or see a sight or difference in the vision in a camera and triggers something, to much more complex things that are, you know, designed to have a much more in-depth interactive component to them, so that you could actually stand there, first be surprised by it in the woods, and then suddenly notice that it seems to respond to you, and then pretty soon it becomes this little dance between this viewer and this sound that they didn't expect.
So you're making the art, and
Yeah.
you're participating in the art, which is really
So
interesting.
I think that's an
Interesting
excellent
experience, yeah.
Thought.
And actually, you know, as we've been having conversations about what could or should happen here at Montalvo, some of the people that have been participating in those discussions have said, you know, because we're in the heart of Silicon Valley, even though it's a very bucolic, natural setting, it would be very interesting to actually use technologies that were developed here to create the art. And what you're talking about is exactly that, developing something that would be responsive to people as they went by. And that would be really an interesting thing to see happen here. Yeah.
Well, of course, not to be downer, but this whole area, Mountain View, there's like 9 Superfund sites here. It's not like it's just bucolic. I mean, it looks, things
Good,
are
so
not
you could do something about toxic too.
You know, there's something also though so powerful, I think, about your idea, for me anyway, when you have people stationed in different coordinates and they share something in common, and depending on, you know, where you stand or not, you know, how much of that conversation are you really privy to? There was an artist, and I'm forgetting his or her name, but they took the church bells from all these different towns, and then they were synchronized and then played them live on the radio. So the only spot you could hear the sonic piece as a whole was while you're listening to the radio, but it was something so beautiful that this was happening, you know, all over these, you know, related towns. And so I think that there's something that can't replace the dynamic vulnerability and precious sense of somebody with their blood pulsing while you're experiencing it, you know. And so for me, when I was looking at your various modes, it really struck me how different you are, like when you're on stage and you're really making Pamela's world, right? Or you're funneling, you're channeling, you know. Then when you're doing sometimes the installation work, or the, you know, it's just a very different experience, and it's great that you've allowed yourself to expand and feel how it is to explore some of the same ideas through these different sources. And I was wondering, for you, in this exploration, what have you discovered for yourself about the power of what you can create in these distinct venues? It's like you've got these different mediums, but you can have the same genre of interest. You see what I mean?
Well, for me, I mean, for years and years and years, the main thing I did was compose music and perform live. ago, I started making some installation pieces, but in more recent years, I've had a couple of chances where I was actually asked to make an installation, give an entire gallery to show something. And what I would say about that is, I'm just happy, I've always been a fence sitter in terms of like different, I've always been the kind of person that when I go into a restaurant, I don't want to order the combination plate because I don't want to have to choose. And I'm that way with my art too. I want to do all these different things, and so I end up trying to put them all into the piece. So it's a joy to me that there's no rule that says that if you are a performance artist, you can't also be an installation artist, or if you're a composer, you can't also be a performer, or if you're a video artist, you can't also make sonic art. I'm just so happy that there's no such rule because each thing offers me something different. I have to tell you, performing will always be very close to my heart, and I have a feeling it'll always be central to what it is that I do. But I can't tell you how liberating it is to be able to make work and that doesn't require me to be present.
Right, the work is performing for you.
Like I put it in the gallery and then I leave it there, and it's still going, and I'm not there. That's like, wow.
Is that kind of like not dying?
Maybe, or it's just like not. It's like being able to have the work happen while you finish working and the work is still there. I mean, usually if my work is happening, it's because the only thing like that is recorded works. Like I have some CDs that, so now somebody can play the CD and I don't have to be there to sing to them, they can hear the music. But this is like, something that's even kind of multidimensional and layered and complex and even maybe interactive somehow, and yet I don't have to be there, I can just go. And that's a nice feeling.
Sure, absolutely.
But at the same time, I can't like let go of the performance part because there's nothing that feels like that either.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like a direct feedback.
Yeah.
So, Dawn, is this?
We actually have, if you still have some time, we have two questions from cyberspace. Both of them are for Barbara. The first one is, we've been asked if you can speak about a bit about what it means to combine contemporary art with sort of the formal and historic nature of Montalvo.
So I think that there are places at Montalvo that lend themselves to more discrete artworks because of the nature of the physical space. And those would be the Italianate garden, where there are very formal spaces and you could put either contemporary or historic works, but the space is so clearly framed that you would want to see a physical artwork. I think that in terms of the historical nature of the buildings and the landscape, contemporary art that is site-specific rather than discrete works, like I described before, is a way of actually bringing the history to life. So, for example, I could imagine an artist wanting to develop an installation piece that actually elaborated on the history of the people that occupied this space, or was a response to the architecture. And those things, rather than disrespecting or being counter to the historical spaces, actually enhance your understanding of them.
Good. The second question is, could you describe what you anticipate will be the difference of response, or if you anticipate there will be a difference of response between, say, urban walkers versus nature hikers when they approach the artwork on the ground?
I've been thinking about that a lot because I was up here over the weekend hiking through the so-called natural landscape up above. I mean, there's no such, you said everything's nature, and even the woods up there are constructed to a certain extent that they feel natural. And what I've been thinking about is people that go out for a hike in nature how would they respond to an artwork that they find in nature? Would they find that to be a disruption, or would they find it to be an enhancement? And I think that that's actually kind of an interesting experiment, and the role of the artist to actually see how people respond. I think that in more urban situations, people are used to seeing all kinds of things and take them in stride. And there are more urban parts of the site, but I would cite any part of the site that is where there are physical buildings, and you would be more likely to say, well, gee, that's an interesting object that I found there, and there are objects all over this site that were put here by Phelan and subsequent people, and you're more likely to say, well, that's not so unusual. So people are going to be probably a little bit more accepting of finding artwork in places that appear to be more man-made than the so-called natural landscape, which isn't, so to speak.
I think that's a really interesting question as a person who is more of an urban walker than a nature hiker. I wonder if it's because of my bent, how I react to these things, and how maybe for some people it would be completely different. I think there are some people who try to escape from man-made stuff, and then they might be upset or angry if they saw it.
That's what I'm wondering
But
about, yeah.
when I, like, for example, when I had my Jurassic residency, you can hike deep, deep into these woods, so deep that you could get lost. And you think you don't see anything man-made. And suddenly, there's all these sculptures that were commissioned that are out there. And to me, it's like finding treasure.
Well, that's what the way I would feel about it.
It's like, you know, I mean, or it's, I don't know, it's like being in 2001 and you're those apes and suddenly there's these monoliths. There's nothing else, but there's these monoliths, you know. But it's, except that that's maybe more foreboding or something, and this is more, and also because the way those were chosen and curated, they really kind of sit into the land in a way that they almost seem like they could have grown there, and yet they're these geometric shapes that couldn't have possibly been there, you know, whatever. And I just find it like, you know, it's like you were on a treasure hunt and suddenly you found the tree. So, but I know there are people who are like, oh, I didn't want to see somebody's thing they made. I wanted to just see, you know, plants or
But
whatever.
it might be like an Easter egg kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been in deep forests and in places in other parts of the world where all of a sudden you see like a bright orange caterpillar, and it might as well be a piece of contemporary art because you don't expect to see it in the middle of a deep forest. So,
or is it like finding a message in a bottle? I mean,
yes.
there's this vast, vast ocean, and then suddenly somebody made something and it floated up to me, you know?
It's like it's the treasures,
Yeah.
but you know, I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how people would respond to things that are put into the natural landscape, as opposed to things that are in more urbanized settings.
Do you know, is it at UCSB, is it Terry Allen's tree that sings to you?
Yes, Terry
Yeah.
Allen has 3 trees at UCSD.
Yeah.
They're all dead trees that were wrapped in lots and lots of squares of lead that was hammered onto the trees. And 2 of them have music programs that was music that was commissioned for the trees, and then one of them has a kind of speech program, and they go on and off at intervals. So you could be going through the forest and never even notice the trees because the color of the eucalyptus bark is almost the same as the color of lead. Or you might be going through it and all of a sudden hear somebody singing something or playing
Yeah,
something.
and so when
like
I
a
was
big
12-year-old and walked through that forest, to me it was like the enchanted forest. The tree
Exactly.
was singing to me, and that instant probably has affected my life as much as a 20-year relationship with my husband.
Don't tell him that.
Well, they're both
He might be depending on the internet.
Yes.
Well, speaking of the internet, we have one last question. The hope is that Barbara, perhaps supplemented by Donna, can speak a little bit about what's planned for this summer's Sculpture on the Grounds.
Donna needs to answer that question because that's something that is completely in her area.
Yes, well, we have some wonderful commissions. happening this summer. Robin Lasser, who's with us here, is doing a project, the Edible Dress Tent, which maybe I'll just let her speak briefly about after I mention a couple of the other projects that we're doing. We are talking about sound and kind of walking through the environment. We're inviting an artist called Kianga Ford, who's based in New York. And she is creating a series of fictional narratives about this environment, about this particular place, which is going to collaborate with a composer to create these tracks that you'd be able to download or listen to on your cell phone that would take you through a series of guided walks through Montalvo. And we're also hoping that it will include some kind of seating area, perhaps at the lookout point at the top of the hill, where you can look out over the Santa Clara Valley. So that's very interesting to hear you speaking about all these themes, because I think that's some of what you might be exploring.
So how will that work? Will people come? How will they know how to download?
Well, we're going to have to do a lot of signage, a lot of marketing. When we send out the invitation, we'll probably include the download. We'll have to have maybe
Sounds
more
like
than
an app.
Yeah, we'll have to have more than one application probably, so that maybe you can download it, but you can also access it via your cell phone. But that's something we also will have. We'll probably have iPods on site that we'll check out if you give your driving license or something like that. So
And your firstborn.
Yeah.
And then we also have an artist from, he's originally from Mexico City, now lives in Sao Paulo in Brazil, named Hector Zamora. And he's going to be doing a piece that activates the sort of, probably the forest area. We've got a couple of proposals we're working through with him right now. One involved kind of constructing a structure, an aerial structure over the front lawn using thin coloured rope. And this kind of proposal came about through a series of challenges. It's how do you engage that big expansive lawn? Our lawn is used for weddings, it's used for function. It's very difficult to put large scale work smack bang in the middle of the lawn. So how do you do that? Well, maybe you have to go up in the air and think up in the air. It's also a challenge for us because the lawn is it's the first vista you get as you go up the road. So it's the point where if you want to capture people's attention, you need to have something in that environment. But the other proposal he's suggesting, which we're also considering, is something that would kind of filter through the forest with a kind of also engaging some sort of material that would give the appearance of a sort of swarm or cluster of weird bird-like shapes. So that would be something more that you would kind of stumble on as you walk through the forest, but it would be a cumulative kind of effect that you would get.
Can we vote? Whatever we decide.
Sure. Yeah, of course. You have comments?
I think that's pretty interesting. An artist, friend of mine, his name's Hiro Yamagata. He does these laser installations. He did one in Afghanistan. Big, huge laser installation. I guess he's supposed to be one of the first people to do it, like the sculpture. I think that'd be kind of cool, like in the forests. And I guess you could do like laser birds or something, or just some crazy laser installation in the forest. That would be something shocking.
Yeah. Or the use of kind of how do you activate the property through light is something that we've been talking a lot about. So that's very interesting.
Think about the beautiful, powerful tube beams right after 9/11, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how
Could be light,
substantial those are in our memory,
Yeah,
ephemeral,
light,
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's another really interesting way that the space could be activated, is just with the light.
I would like to see somebody actually, in a very subtle way, tackle the issue of lighting the path down the hill when you're leaving the grounds, because of course the neighbors have concerns about not wanting light leakage, but when you're experiencing the forest on your way out, it's a little dark. And developing something that could actually, illuminate the forest in a very subtle way and allow you to experience the forest at night would be really an interesting thing. So why don't you talk about what you're going to be doing this summer?
Well, when my collaborating partner and I were thinking about Montalvo, I guess when we first experienced Kelly, I was on a walk with her looking at Floating World, actually. And Floating World is a piece that the San Jose Arts Commission and the 01 Biennale were responsible in some ways to come to fruition. And they were these floating tents that floated over the Guadalupe River about 32 feet. They hovered above the river, making them sound magical, but they were actually out on a 7-foot beam, and they provided light. And I was talking with Kelly about them, and I said, you know, Ava and I have this idea for a chicken coop. We want to make this dress tent, and then what they are, they're pieces of wearable architecture. If you can imagine something about the size of the ceiling, and at the top it feels like maybe some sort of Victorian dress, and at the bottom it feels like you're, camping somewhere, and that it would be made for chickens, because we thought the digs here were pretty good for the residents, and we thought chickens should have an equally cool abode, and they have a culinary fellow here, and we thought, well, the eggs could be used by the culinary fellow to scramble up some, breakfast for the residents. That's kind of a lie, because we don't really get breakfast, but let's say dinner. But that piece morphed into, I guess this guy there, Phelan, he was a real party animal. They all say, oh, he was a senator, it's his first senator that was voted in by the California citizens, but he's really just a party animal. And he liked to have artists here, artists and musicians and dancers, and he liked to feed them because it kept them here. And he had, so what you have now are these beautiful formal gardens. And so we thought, well, if there's going to be an evolution of the Three Hot Chicks, which was a chicken coop dress tent, let's make something that nods to the urban farmer and vertical growth, right? Because when you get condensed space, it's harder. Now this space, granted, isn't exactly condensed, but let's imagine that it is, or that it's a metaphor for that. So we were looking at this villa and we were noticing the arches, and we were remembering Phelan and his parties and his vegetable gardens that had subsequently been removed, and the grounds are planted with grass, which are extraordinarily beautiful, but they suck up a lot of water, although the water is fed by for 3/4 of the year, it's fed by a cistern here. But still, it's not the most sustainable thing in the world, and diversity is kind of a good thing. So we looked across the way, and we thought, oh, by the way, have you been here in the summer? You guys been here in the summer? It is hot. It is really hot. And I thought, my partner and I, my collaborating partner and I thought, wow, we could provide some shade where you could just sit down, cool down, and think in the hot summer days. That would be fabulous. So right across, we're working with Del McComb, who's the garden curator here, and this is a fabulous opportunity for visual artists such as ourselves to be able to work with a gardener, and he has so much to offer in terms of his knowledge. And the grass just on the little knoll here is going to be removed, and dirt, dirt is sexy because sex is dirty, right? It's always better to have dirt. Just following me here. So we're going to replant it. Del had the idea with dahlias, which are a really showy kind of flower. And then we're going to plant the vegetables up the sides of this urban farmer dress tent, which we call the edible dress tent. So what makes her urban is her big arches. They're about, not quite the size, but almost the size of these windows here will be chain link fence, and that's what the vegetables will grow up. And then above her dress is like made out of backyard awning material. Nice. This beautiful stripe, so you'll get the shades, and then you can sit on this swing, think your own thoughts, but as soon as you start doing that, I don't know if you're like me, but they say that men, especially your age, every 20 seconds think about sex. Do you? Okay. I do too.
No.
So I thought, well, or we thought, she's kind of an attractor too. She knows that a 20-foot high lady can be kind of. So when you swing, these interactions will happen between human mating calls and bird mating calls. And then that's what you'll hear. So you might hear birds actually have very specific mating calls from their full and varied language system. But part of that, it has to do with mating. And humans, the same thing, right? So, gonna get down. Like that. I call that.
Sounds good.
Where's the chickens, or the chicken coop thing?
They're on hold, and I'll tell you why. The other day when I was leaving here.
Coyotes, I would say.
Yeah.
They're on hold because of the coyotes, right?
There is, even on the street here, I was driving down the street, and I was on my cell phone, although you're not supposed to be. I'm looking up, and I see this thing, I think, oh my God. It was a coyote, because I thought it was a wolf or a fox, because I'm not a nature girl either, I guess. But then I realized there's coyotes here, and I thought, maybe we would be making like some kind of weird trap system for the chickens.
Yeah, I live right down the street. We have 25 chickens at our house too. So
You do?
See?
Coyotes count them all the time.
But do you lose the chickens to the coyotes?
No, we have a
You have
coop.
a thing.
Do you
Very
have mountain
close.
lions?
I've never seen a
We've got mountain lions.
Yeah. No, it's understandable, but we'd like to do the chicken coop dress tent somewhere so that the edible dress tent can have a sister. So.
Now, up at the top of these dress tents, who's the torso that protrudes from the top?
Well, it varies. Like, when we were in Russia, in Yekaterinburg, Ms. Yekaterinburg was the torso. Kind of like Ms. California.
Oh.
But if we're at the border between Mexico and San Diego, Robin's the performer. So the performer tries to meet the landscape, tries to activate the geopolitic of the landscape, whoever she is. Sometimes it's a he. We have a cross dress for one of the
Do we have any other questions?
No, just a request of thank you for.
Thank you very much.
That was a fabulous talk. It was really fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming, and just to let you know that we're going to have the gallery open just for like half an hour, so if you wanted to stop by on your way out, very welcome.
Would you be, because you curated that, right?
Well, I co-curated it with our designers in residence, our graphic designers.
Would you have any desire to,
Will you walk us through it?
yeah.
Sure.
I didn't want to put more work
Sure.
here evening, but.
Okay, let's go.
Oh.